It was a good morning for us to start. We had my nephew wrap tefillin for the first time here in the house. They've been with us already for 7 weeks in quarantine, so it was nice to have a celebration. And then we had a Zoom live baby naming for the Mariroviches, for Kermit and Michael. Mazel tov to them. It was quite different, but we will bless their little one at the Torah in the right time. But for now, we wanted to give her name. Her name is Leah, a beautiful name, so Mazel tov to them. We also have, we're doing soup and challah for the quarantine soul. We have nearly 100 that we're giving out. People are picking it up from 1 to 2 o'clock at Chabad. For those of you that reserved, we hope to see you there. And for those of you who didn't reserve, we'll do something else next week, trying to include everyone. We have a pre-Shabbos Zoom. We're calling it a Cyber Kiddush Club at 6:30 on Zoom and on Facebook. You can join us, say l'chaim to each other, and then we'll do a pre-Shabbos service. Sunday morning, we'll be doing services at 9 a.m. to daven together with the Torah thought, and then Gruni will be doing a virtual bagel baking at 11 a.m. on the website on Facebook Live. So that's just a little bit of an infomercial. Now on to the Parsha. So a little thought on this week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, we learn about many of the obligations of sacrifices on the people in the time of the Beit HaMikdash and in the time of the temple. And the Torah tells you what type of sacrifice you brought for atonement or for Thanksgiving, etc., etc. And it was always very uniform. If it was a lamb and oil and wine or whatever that was brought as a sacrifice and then ate by the family or ate by the high priest or the Kohanim and so on. But in 6 cases, the Torah tells us that the obliged sacrifice has to be brought depending on the wealth of the person. For example, if a woman has a child, she brings a sacrifice afterwards, and if she's wealthy, she brought a lamb, and I'm forgetting that she brought a lamb and a lamb and a dove. But if she wasn't wealthy, if she was poor, she just brought 2 doves, and so on. If a leper brought 2 lambs and an ewe, but if they weren't wealthy, they brought 1 lamb and a dove, and so on. And the rabbis tell us an interesting thing, and this is what I want to tell you about. What happened if a poor person is obliged, he was a leper, and he has to bring a sacrifice, a sheep. And then there's such a term in Judaism where someone else could take the obligation for you. So someone says, you know what, instead of you bringing it, I'll take the responsibility for you. Well, what happens if the leper was poor and the person who took the responsibility was wealthy? Does he bring the poor man's sacrifice or the wealthy man's? So the rabbis tell us, of course, that he has to bring the wealthy person's sacrifice because he's wealthy or she's wealthy. She has to bring the sacrifice according to her capability. But what happens if it's the opposite way? If a wealthy person is a leper and has an obligation and the poor person says, I'll take it for you, I'll do it instead of you. Do they bring the wealthy person's sacrifice or do they bring the poor person's sacrifice? And the Torah tells us something interesting, that the person has to bring the sacrifice of the wealthy person. But 1 second, that's a double standard. It's unfair. If a poor person is obliged and the wealthy person brings instead, you tell him to bring like a wealthy person because he's wealthy. So why, when the wealthy person is obliged and the poor person brings instead, do you say 1 second you have to bring the responsibility of the wealthy person? I'm poor. How do you expect me to bring from the wealthy person? So I bring you a fascinating, powerful answer that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said at a gathering in October of 1985 to the guests that came for the month of Tishrei to visit him and be with him in New York, from Israel and from Paris and from all over, London, from South Africa, Australia, from all over the world. And the Rebbe said something to you, but I also bring this powerful message because I think it's something interesting that sometimes we think that the laws of the sacrifice, the laws of the temple don't pertain to us. But this is a message actually that we take from something so basic and simple, a law of what type of sacrifice has to be brought, and it's a message for us that if we use it in our life, it'll be so important. And the Rebbe said like this, the Torah doesn't view you by your capability, but by your possibility. The moment, by your mindset, the moment you take on, the moment the poor person takes on to bring a sacrifice for a rich person, the Torah says, hey, you have suddenly become wealthy. You say, 1 second, I don't have the wealth yet, I don't have the money yet. The Torah says the fact that in your mind you made that obligation, you made that commitment, you are a wealthy person. The Talmud says like this, Ein ani ela b'das. There is no such a thing of being poor only in your mind. You know who said that? One of the greatest sages, Abaya. Now let me tell you something about Abaya. Abaya, who was the great sage of the yeshiva in Pumbedisa, one of the greatest sages till today that we mentioned, had a very hard upbringing. When his mother was pregnant, his father, whose name was Chayil, passed away. And very shortly after his mother gave birth to him, she passed away too. He's what we called a rounded orphan. He had no parents. And although he grew up in the house of his uncle Rabbah and became one of the greatest sages in the history of the Jewish people that is quoted and revered till today, he grew up with poverty his entire life. A rounded orphan and a poor man. And what does he tell us? Ein ani ela b'das. There's no poor person, only in their mindset. But this is not just a matter of physical wealth. It's a matter of everything. What the Torah is telling us is that we have to believe in our potential, in our power to success, to study, to wealth, to all these things. And the moment we believe in that power and we work on it, we are that which we put our mind to. It doesn't mean that we should take things for granted. You know, in New York, they say that the person prays for God. He says, God, I want you to give me patience, and I want it right now. It doesn't mean that we expect to be a certain way and at a certain time. What it means is that when we put our mind to something, when we put our impact to something, we can reach and we can attain it. And it goes in everything in our life. For example, I'll give you an example. Your kid comes home with a report card, and they have great grades, but their math, they're not doing so good. I know, I'm sorry to my Russian friends. To them, math is the most important. One thing you can do is you can tell your kid, why didn't you do good at math? Do you need a tutor? Or you can say, I see you did so good in Bible. I see you did so good in behavior, in cleanliness, in language. And I know that you have the potential to, when you put yourself to something, you accomplish it. That's amazing. And that's it you have to say. Your kid will get it. That they'll be able to succeed and do what they want. It's about the mindset you put, about how you nurture. I want to tell you a story. One of my favorite stories, you might have heard this from me. The Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, once had to go around fundraising for a family that was thrown into prison. Back in Russia, many of the Jews owned inns. And what happened once, or they rented inns from the Poritz, who was the head of the town. And what happened is that every month they paid. How did they pay? People came, they drank, they got vodka, they slept there on their way, and that's how they would pay. What happens if it was a bad winter and there was terrible snow and no one came? You didn't have money to pay. What happens if you didn't pay? You got thrown into prison. They didn't care. They didn't give you an opportunity. There was no PPP loans. And especially to the Jews, it was very tough. So the Alter Rebbe decided to go fundraise. He needed 5,000 ruble to ransom this family. So he goes to one town, and he comes to the town, and he meets the two rabbis of the town who give tremendous respect. The Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, the founder of the Chabad movement. And he says he wants to go around door to door fundraising money. And he comes and he knocks. He says, I want to go to the door of this wealthy person, Mr. Solomon. And they say, listen, Mr. Solomon is a miser. He doesn't give any money. He's the richest man in town, but he doesn't give anyone money. In fact, the only people that ever went to him, he gives them all the same rusty old copper coin. We're not going with you. It's a waste of time. The Alter Rebbe insists that he wants to go. Finally, out of respect to the Alter Rebbe, they said, we're going to go with you. So together they come, and as they're coming to the doorsteps, the Alter Rebbe turns to them, the Baal HaTanya, and he says, listen, I'm going in with you on one condition. You don't say anything the whole time we're in. Let me do the speaking, let me do the reactions. I don't want to hear from you guys. Fine. They agree. The Alter Rebbe says, what are they going to do? So they come in, they sit down, the guy welcomes them, and the Alter Rebbe pleads his case. And he says how, he says how this family with little kids are in prison and they're suffering in a pit and they have no food practically and they won't survive and they're being persecuted and so on and so forth. So the guy says, okay, tell me, how much money do you need? He said, I need 5,000 ruble. So this Meiser, Mr. Solomon, says, you know, this is such a worthy cause. I hear your pain. I hear the story. It's so powerful. Give me a minute. He comes back with a little pouch, and he gives it opens it up and takes out a rusty copper coin, and he gives it to the Alter Rebbe, the cheapest coin you could get, and he gives it to the Alter Rebbe, and he says, here, I want to be involved in this. The other two rabbis are livid after such a story. They want to say something, but they remember their promise. The Alter Rebbe starts thanking him profusely. This is so amazing. You're so generous. You have such a big heart, blah, blah, blah. And he starts writing him a receipt with all these blessings that God should give him for his generosity and for all that he did, and so on. Then he says, listen, we have so much more to do. We have to raise another 4,999 ruble. I'm going to go now with the guys. They start walking to the door, and as they get to the door, they leave the door, and they close the door behind them. And suddenly he says, the two rabbis turn to the Alter Rebbe, and they say, look at this. Look what he gave us. And the Alter Rebbe says, quiet. And as they're walking down the driveway, the door opens, and the guy says, wait, rabbis, please come back, please come back. So they go back, and he says, sit down. He says, I decided I want to give you 1,000 ruble for this. It's really bothering me. And he takes out of his pocket 1,000 rubles, and he gives it to them with hands shaking, and they count it, and they say thank you again, and the Alter Rebbe is blessing him how amazing he is, and writes him another receipt, and so on. And as they get to the door, this happens a third time. He calls them back. He says, listen, I want to give you the entire 5,000 rubles. I want this to be my mitzvah. I can't sleep at night. If this guy is not going to his family's going to be in prison. And he says, let me tell you a story. Because the rabbis ask, how could this have happened? He says, let me tell you a story. Years ago, someone once came to ask me for money. And I wasn't the wealthiest then. And I took out one copper coin from my pocket, and I gave it to him. And the guy threw it back into my face and spat at me and said, you should be embarrassed. I never would imagine that someone would give so little charity. And I made a promise then. And I promised to myself that until someone takes this copper coin with joy and accepts it from me as my charity, I will never give another dollar to charity. And guess what? Ever since, every rabbi, every meshulach, every person that came, I asked them, I gave them this coin, and they all threw it back at me. And I was waiting and aching to give charity. But I couldn't until you came. And when you took that coin from me, you thanked me so profusely, I said, I want to do the mitzvah now. Now I can finally give charity. So now we can understand, going back to what the Rebbe explained from this week's Torah portion with the sacrifices, that the Torah says, the moment this poor man had the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to take the obligation of the wealthy man, I'm going to give the charity. The Torah sees him as wealthy. He doesn't have the money yet. Hashem will give it to him. He has to give the wealthy person's sacrifice. And when the Rebbe said the story, he finished with another story. He says, back in Russia, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe really wanted to print the teachings of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, but there wasn't enough money. So this chassid came along, and he made a commitment for a huge sum to do it. And the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him a tremendous blessing, and eventually he became so wealthy he was able to pay off this whole thing, plus give a lot more charity. And the Rebbe said that when he made the commitment, he didn't have the money, didn't know how he was going to give it, but when he made it in his mindset that he was going to do that, he opened up the gates of heaven, and suddenly he was able to do it and even more. And the Rebbe said the same is in everything in our life. When we make a commitment to something and we reach higher, we're able to do it. So I want to make an ask, an appeal to you guys. No, not the one you're thinking about. I want to make an appeal that we all try in this time of quarantine to become Torah scholars, to study Torah, to think that we are going to be Torah scholars. We're going to open up the book. We're going to open up the Torah. We're going to open up the Pirkei Avot. We're going to open up the Sefer HaMitzvos from Maimonides, and we're going to study. And we are going to become Torah scholars. Because when we reach for something, when we have faith in our talents, in our God-given opportunities, then we're able to all be wealthy. Remember what Abaya said. Ein ani ela badas. There's no such a thing as a poor person. Only it's in your mind. If Abaya, who was a rounded orphan, could say that? If Abaye, who lived in such poverty, could say that, what could we say? And look at Abaye today. He's one of the richest, wealthiest Jews in the way we perceive him, in his knowledge, in the Torah he contributed to us. Chavra, we'll see you at 6:30. Have a great Shabbos. Let's get on to the Cyber Kiddush Club and celebrate Shabbos before it comes together as a community. Have a great Shabbos, and may today Rosh Chodesh bring healing to all of us. The Rosh Chodesh, Iyar Ani Hashem Rofecha. Take care.